I'd like to thank you for joining us today for the Chime Digital Health Insights webinar entitled Healthcare Cybersecurity, Best Practices and Approaches. We have a distinguished panel here today from Oracle and Oracle Health. I'd like to introduce them at the beginning just to sort of tell us what the day in the life of is like in both of their positions and Oracle Health and in the healthcare industry. Why don't we start off with Steve? Brief intro.
Hi, Frank, and thank you very much for inviting me here today. I'm Steve Fridakis. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer of Oracle Health. In that, I oversee the implementation, management, compliance, and risk that has to do with our installations and our customer-hosted environment.
Okay, Esteban.
Yeah, thanks again, Frank. Good to be here. Esteban Rubens. I'm the Healthcare Field CTO for Oracle Cloud. And I mostly work with customers and partners to help them in their cloud journey, right? And I obviously focus on healthcare, so providers, payers, life sciences, med devices. And I'm also involved in some of our product teams, helping bring some of the products to cloud. So I have a background in medical imaging, so I've done a lot of that. Of course, you can imagine security is paramount when doing that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And my name is Frank Katita. Again, I am Senior Strategist for Chime and be moderating today. I'm especially excited about this session. Sometimes it's not so when you're dealing with the manufacturers and vendors, but I mean, Oracle Health and the transformation that you're going through both organizationally and with the turmoil and the craziness in the marketplace right now, it's especially interesting to hear the vision that you gentlemen will be bringing to this today. So just sort of a warm-up question here. What are just the plethora of cybersecurity risks that are out there right now? So what are some of the risks that you're seeing that healthcare providers and payers are facing today, and how are they changing? Where are you seeing some of the differences? Steve, you want to kick off?
Certainly. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about the nuances of healthcare. And that has to do a lot with the integration of multiple suppliers and legacy applications. In a clinical setting, there is a lot of devices and a lot of operating systems and external faculties that are all not necessarily in sync. And that has a lot to do with what I'm about to say. The first issue, therefore, is a potential breach in the supply chain. Because of the reliance on all those suppliers, we have to make sure that not only our systems are secure and they're deployed securely, but those that we rely on are similarly secure and they meet to some degree some level of equivalent posture. The second thing, I don't think it is going to be quite surprising, but it is the proverbial insider threat. We have to know who is accessing the systems. Again, in a clinical setting, it is not as straightforward because of affiliates, because of the complexity of our operation and how many would have access and what kind of access they have. So that is paramount. A third issue is misconfiguration. So we do see, obviously, a combination of cloud-based applications, legacy applications, and so on. But it is quite easy to see that this environment is not fitting the same kind of security posture, and some misconfiguration, intentional or not, results into a potential breach. We cannot discount the fact that the attack techniques that we see, and I think we're going to have the opportunity to talk about AI, which is quite the buzzword of the days. But anyway, they evolve. And as such, we have to also evolve our defenses. The last thing, I would be amiss to not refer to the current regulatory space. So we do see that not only the compliance is changing, but the data residence requirements are changing. So again, in a cloud setting, we have to be aware of where our data is and what are the restrictions as the data is being replicated for, cloud being elastic, but also for operational efficiencies. So we have to make sure that fits the customers and obviously our operations guidelines and restrictions. So that is what I think these days as the key risks that we face.
Very good. Esteban, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, the everything that Steve said, in addition, we know that healthcare data is more valuable, right? It's in the open market, it's 10x more valuable than financial data. So it's very of great interest, and state actors obviously get involved because there's a potential for all sorts of things like, blackmail. We know that state actors get involved in targeting medical facilities near military bases because the prevalence of military personnel. And now when we go into genomic data, which is more and more available in EHRs and other systems, that is incredibly more sensitive, right? Because there is no way to really anonymize that. And so even if there is no clarity on why they want that data, it says a lot about the person. Maybe not today necessarily, but in 5 years. I mean, so it is it's too tempting, right? And that makes it even. And we know that, very unfortunately, the resources, so IT resources in healthcare are overworked like everybody else in healthcare, and they're burnt out. And so it's a very uneven fight because the people who are, the bad actors attacking are essentially unlimited time and unlimited resources many times, especially if they're backed by state actors. And the defenders are quite the opposite, right? So we're trying to even out the playing field.
Great points. I think the social engineering aspects are massive in terms of what's going on out there. And to Steve's point, the supply chain implications, I mean, we knew this was happening, and just within the last 3 months with the massive breaches that we've seen, how devastating it was to supply chains that we never thought, people not being able to write paper checks in places that were totally unrelated to healthcare. So it's become viral in the truest sense of the word. So I'm sort of curious that you're again, Oracle Health has a new vision, transition, transformation, digital health, and data storage. I mean, it's massive. I'm just wondering, Esteban, what's the approach? How would you describe the Oracle Health sales philosophy or sales personality now that you're going to market with?
Yeah, so look, I'll give it the perspective from the cloud side. As we know, the applications are starting to be migrated to cloud, and that offers the best hope really to defend against these attacks. So in our cloud, which is we call a second generation cloud, because we learned a lot of lessons and we incorporated them into the design of the cloud. We do all the table stakes that you would expect. So I'm not going to bore everybody with all the things that encryption and rest and all the things, right? But things that are notable for us is that the zero trust model is embodied in the fact that everything is denied by default. So in the cloud, you really have to explicitly allow things for people, users, groups, anybody doing anything has to be allowed to do that. And then the other thing that I would point out is the the influence of automation. Oracle has been at the forefront of that. We talk a lot about our autonomous database. That's not necessarily relevant here, but a lot of design principles from that autonomous database haven't been incorporated into the cloud. And there was an interesting op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal, I think in early April, by Larry Ellison and Seema Verma.
I remember that.
Yeah, right. And they were, it's very provocative, the title, we should leave the security to the machines. But I think agree or disagree, it's an interesting point because a lot of breaches have their origin in misconfiguration. So if we take the fact that people are overworked and burnt out people are more prone to making mistakes or overlooking things, some of the basic things probably are better left to automation, where you can ensure that you're not going to make mistakes. So that is particularly important in healthcare because I'm not going to list the examples, but there are literally thousands of examples of misconfigurations, like, object storage buckets being left wide open and PHI, sort of terabytes of PHI or hundreds of terabytes being just wide open. There's a company actually that constantly does, they go out and they see what they can find in terms of DICOM images, and they found billions of images that are totally unsecured. So it's all over. So trying to help healthcare IT kind of focus on the things that they bring most value to, but kind of not worrying so much about keeping the lights on, because that is a lot of grunt work that is not necessary. The whole concept of intelligent automation that we've been talking about, kind of RPA, right? Robotic process automation. A lot of people prefer to call it intelligent automation, kind of bringing that into the security realm so that people can focus on things that are more important without kind of responding to the, sort of alarm fatigue from the clinical side, right, on the floor translates into the same, alarm fatigue for cybersecurity people, because that happens all the time. So it's these design principles. And also, when we talk about kind of HIPAA compliant, well, that's a loaded term because there's no such thing as compliance, but at the station, whatever you want to kind of call it. So when you're talking about in the Oracle Cloud about a HIPAA compliant or something that's been tagged HIPAA, we have more controls, and we ensure that no one from our side has access to anything a customer may be storing, and the way we do separation at the network level. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff that it has been kind of thoughtfully put into the design of the cloud that is directly relevant to healthcare organizations.
Well put. Well put. Steve, anything to add? Approach on your side?
It is absolutely true, but as a thing we're going to talk about in a little bit, is more about the deployment and a combination of what makes sense for your particular operation in the context of your compliance requirements, and also with very good awareness on your operations and business needs. We cannot discount that balance that you need to find, especially in a healthcare operation.
So, I mean, you're meeting with a lot of clients, and you can identify the ones that have established best practices, which is important. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that. But in the courses that I teach and in the writing that I do, people also like to slow down for a car wreck. So I'm looking at what you see as some of the best practices, and if there's anything in particular that you say, well, this is probably the worst practice, and it's going to cost you a little bit more. So I'm wondering. From Steve, from a best practices point of view, what are you seeing out there that's impressive?
So when it comes down to implementing security, and when actually you put this in the perspective of recent major attacks, you want to think of WannaCry, for instance. It comes down to three things: schedule, policy, and maintenance. Now, this is interesting because if you truly rationalize those three things, security is only a component to it. So we don't schedule patches, we oversee patches, and we obviously are part of the development and deployment of policy, but we don't do that alone. So many a time, therefore, a security issue is broken down to those three components in my perspective. But let's go back to best practices. So when I think of security controls and how to deploy security, I think in two ways. One is quite deterministic, and the other is the non-deterministic side. So the deterministic side is what you know you have. And there you say that I would deploy the necessary controls depending on my environment. Obviously, now being cloud-centric, we're not exactly thinking of perimeter. We are operating on a much more fluid basis. But at the end of the day, on a deterministic basis, we're saying we want to see whitelisting, patching, ongoing and continuous scanning, and code analysis. These are basic controls that we can deploy. We establish a bar and we stick to it. Now, the other part, the non-deterministic, that is quite interesting because in a clinical environment, there is no boundary. Because you are part of a broader ecosystem, and that ecosystem could include hospitals, outpatient facilities, or all kinds of operations that are not, frankly, at any given time, even known to you. So there, what we're trying to now deploy is more behavioral patterns of access and deception. Now, what we're trying to do is we're trying to always place a context in both access to content and access to anything else like applications. And what I mean with that is that it is not enough for us to say, I'm Steve, and here's my password. That is so trivial. But once you start putting it in the context of, I'm Steve, I'm using a certain platform, I'm coming from a certain IP, I'm accessing a certain application that I have the rights to know, and I'm attempting to access certain data, all that together, that constitutes a much more complex and much more transitive, actually, because things change as roles change or other parameters change, access model. And that's how we think of deploying. The last thing I want to say is that you said about bad practices. So with respect to all my peers, deploying indiscriminately the next buzzword of technology just because you're keeping up with what others do, in my experience, results in an inordinate amount of false positives that actually occupy so many of your people trying to figure it all out. So you have to be economical, and you have to more work along the lines of how you can correlate events from your telemetry and how this becomes meaningful and translatable and attributable to an asset or an owner. Once you solve that problem, then you have something to work with, and then obviously becomes the efficiency of your instant response capability. So that's my opinion.
No, it's interesting that chasing the hype curve is so popular these days. I just recently wrote an article called "The Joy of Missing Out" instead of the fear of missing out, and we found that there more and more people were glad that they sat on their hands for a while and skipped an iteration and waited it for other people to make the mistakes than to try it themselves, and as you well said, and paralyze their staff with false positives and new forms of computerization that they weren't really expecting. Esteban, anything you want to add in terms of best practices or again, worst practices?
Yeah, so maybe not taking enough time to do the blocking and tackling. So we're chasing the bright shiny object, and then maybe not. I don't see enough people putting enough time and effort into rapid recovery, right? Everybody is focused on prevention, which is important, right? You have to have defense in depth and everything that people talk about, but at this point, in the US, in any industrialized country with a strong economy, you have to assume that you're going to get breached, right? It really doesn't matter how good your defenses are. So given that we know that, not having a good executable plan that has been well tested and rehearsed for rapid recovery is strange, right? Because it's not really about if, but rather when. And so, if your data is safe, but you don't really know how to get back into operation, or it's going to take you 2 weeks, as we see constantly, right? The headline. Days would be great for a lot of people, but weeks or even months, because they're chasing after things that they haven't really planned for. So the concept of the war game, right? And running through a bunch of different scenarios and being prepared at any moment to just recover from something that may not give you a zero RPO, but will keep you back in operation. And that is huge. So I just don't see that enough, talking to customers in healthcare. Obviously, there's thousands of organizations, but still, on the average, I think more effort should be and thought should be put into that, because we have the tools. And that's kind of the thing that I find odd and also kind of irritating, because we have the tools. It's not a technology problem, right? It's a willingness problem. It's resourcing. It's a decision. It's like, if we didn't know, right? If it were, some like new virus, hopefully never again, but and we didn't have the tools, well, that's excusable. But given that we know exactly what we need to do, and everybody could be protected and back in operation in minutes or hours, there really is no excuse.
I think it's interesting you talk about the technology side, non-technology side. So when you look at the breach response part, I mean, our research shows that one of the biggest problems is the communications flow, how people talk to each other from the front desk all the way up to the boardroom with unified messaging. So, I mean, some of these things, technology and artificial intelligence, aren't going to solve quickly, because it's human nature that they have a camera in front of them with a microphone and saying crazy things. So I'm just curious, based on what you were saying, or both of you were saying, from a competitive advantage point of view, I mean, how are you positioning the benefits of using the Oracle Health approach versus what you might be seeing in other players in the marketplace?
Well,
Esteban?
Steve, do you want to tackle the Oracle Health side?
Yeah.
So the idea is the ability to migrate into an environment that has a broader ecosystem that provides the capabilities of security that is so much more flexible, so much more integratable to your own environment than what a traditional on-prem hosting system is. Obviously, it is a process, and that process requires that you establish what makes sense for you, and that is something that we are going to work with customers to define. But the benefit is that it is a synergetic approach, and I'm not just referring to the joint responsibility model that is obviously quite the norm in cloud systems. I'm just talking about, we understand clinical, we have expertise in this. I've been in health for a while now, and we understand the complexities, the nuances, and the data sets, not just size, but also how that works. So the migration to the cloud and the cybersecurity approach gives us the opportunity to access much more vast capabilities and also take advantage of the native cloud capabilities. So this is the basics, and obviously we'll have the opportunity to get into much more detail.
Okay.
Yeah, and on the cloud side and sort of Oracle broadly, I think an important difference is that we've been focused on enterprise customers for decades, right? We're not just about giving you the best tools so that you can figure things out. We understand enterprise, and we understand, so, you know, and that extends to healthcare now. And of course, the focus of Oracle is healthcare now. And so there's really nothing more enterprise in healthcare than an EHR. So that approach where we're really not thinking about only, oh, you know, you can have these great compute tools or these AI services or store, you know, the components where you can rattle off hundreds or thousands of things that you can do in your cloud and sort of provide builders the best tools. Well, as we know in healthcare, again, just to bring this up, people are overworked, under-resourced, and a lot of them just don't have any interest in building things, right? They want things that work. And that's what Oracle has been doing for decades. So that we bring that approach to healthcare as well. And so from that, everything flows, you know, the automation, you know, reducing the attack surface, you know, the EHR when it moves to cloud, how we provide resiliency to any kind of attack, including ransomware, through rapid recovery. All of those things are part of the enterprise mindset. We have deployed for all industries. When you think about financials, right, or supply chain, all the things that we know about, just integrating those proven and you know, time-tested best practices into the EHR and really everything else that we do, because it's not just the EHR. So that, I think that is, so and also really the coupling of the enterprise focus and the second generation cloud, because there really isn't in between the other clouds and our second generation cloud, and the way that it was architected, you know, the way that we do virtualization, the way our network is built, not just in terms of isolation or security, but just raw speed. And when you're thinking about doing population health, right, or doing any kind of analytics, that makes a huge difference. You know, not really security focused, but it is different. So we really, you know, talk about those as differentiators often.
That's good. That's good. Our audience is starting to hear a lot more about this concept of autonomous shield. And I'm wondering if, first of all, if you could define it, because some of these things have multiple definitions depending on who you ask, and how that's being deployed. So who would like to take that one?
I'll take that.
Okay.
So have you ever thought of security as the key motivator for a successful cloud migration? That's how it all started. And we said, oh, cloud is all about cost, elasticity, on-demand resources. But we said, no, in this particular case, and in the context of a customer who is contemplating migration from the current on-prem to OCI-based operation of Millennium, that is what made sense to us. So this is what Autonomous Shield is. So Autonomous Shield is an assessment, is a multi-layered assessment where we not only bring the benefits of the operation of Millennium on the cloud, but we also state that in order for that to be successful, it has to be coupled with security features and functions that are provided by OCI, or OCI gives us the opportunity to do that better. Now, it does not mean that there is one size fits all. There is, as I said before, a synergetic. We find out, and that, hence the assessment, we find out the current state of the journey, of the cloud journey of the customer. Are they in the cloud? What kind of cloud? How do they authenticate? Do they have the necessary components of business continuity? Is the policy covering the handling of sensitive data? And how about the broader ecosystem? How does that work? So we help them get there. And that's the first part of the assessment. Identify the gap, identify the benefits of the migration. And then once they migrate, we also say, oh, that's not good enough. The fact that you essentially landed in an OCI-based operation doesn't mean that you do it well or to the full potential. So we say, these are the security features, functions, capabilities that you could augment your current to fully meet the notion of Autonomous Shield. So therefore, migration to OCI coupled with best practices that we fit to the customer-specific operations, so they're not one size fits all. That's what the goal of Autonomous Shield is.
Fascinating, fascinating. Esteban, anything to add?
No, that covers it all.
I figure it would. So, I mean, this is such a dynamic world with cybersecurity and the kinds of breaches that we have out there. I mean, how do you stay ahead of this? I mean, how do you predict what the next new thing is in terms of breaches or ransomware or whatever it is? How do you guys stay ahead of the game? Steve?
So I'm going to give you a philosophical answer to this, and here it is. I have found that when you're facing a security challenge or, God forbid, a security breach, which I have many times in my life, you find that you assume one of the three personas, or most likely a combination of three. So you become a preacher. You just hope that somehow it all works out. Or you become a politician. You just need friends to support you. Or you become a prosecutor. So you start saying, if I only had a budget, if I only, so you start being more accusatory. What we're trying to do is to say, shed all this and start thinking as a scientist. In other words, when you're facing a cybersecurity threat, start questioning everything. I had the responsibility of HPO for many years. So I was in the middle of the HPO hack, and many days after, 2-3 weeks of analysis, we just realized exactly through that process that the hacker, and it was an enemy state, the hacker was inside because they had breached our MFA process, and that's what we found. So similarly, what we do is we say, think as a scientist, question everything, as improbable as it may be, and build a process that is applicable to what you do. So therefore, operationally, we do have intelligence feeds. We have very good contacts with vendors and other entities to receive actionable intelligence. And I underline actionable because there is a lot of information there that you have to massage to actually fit your particular operation and your capabilities to actually react to it. We scan constantly, all the time, everything. Remember the deterministic thing I said before? Well, what we know. And we look for things that we do not know. We encrypt everything, and we maintain full control of cryptographic artifacts. So roots and all that goes with it is under our control. At the same time, we train our incident responders to follow a thought process along the lines of what I said, and to be able to get closer to understand the business operation, because typically a breach in our setting is not something that it is contained within our environment. It evolves through partners, through the customer, through us. So it is absolutely paramount in the context of an instant response to be able to not only have contacts, but to also being able to understand what the data is telling you, the telemetry that you receive that is specific to every single customer. So this is what we're trying to do.
Interesting. Esteban, any additions?
The automation aspect, right, and the behavioral analytics, it's not, because obviously predicting what's next, well, no one can really do that, but
Right.
it's not understanding what's normal, right, and what's expected, and then going from there, because there are the obvious role-based things, right, that you can't control everything, but if there's someone who is a nurse that is all of a sudden trying to come in from VPN that you have no idea where it originates, well, that may be a problem, right? Because that's not expected. So it's all these layers. So of course we get intelligence from partners and so on, but there are things that are impossible to predict. But once you know that there's something going on that is of unexpected or suspicious, then you can isolate. So it's all about the layers, and whether it's in the application or the infrastructure, there's room everywhere to increase that protection. And when we talk about the EHR in Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, right, in OCI, we have both sides, right, and so that is extremely valuable, because not a lot of people can say that, and so we can.
Right.
We have that synergy.
Very good. So we talked about it a little bit earlier. The rubber hits the road during the implementation stage. So what do you see as some of the implementation challenges? I mean, one of the challenges that we're seeing all the time, and the governance has become cool again. So that could be one of the top implementation challenges, of knowing who's calling the shots. What are you guys seeing out there in the field in terms of major implementation challenges, and what you're doing to circumvent them?
Well, one thing I can say is thinking globally, not just the US, an interesting feature of OCI is that it is by far the largest cloud out there in terms of regions. So we have many more regions, and we have much better coverage, and with that comes sovereign coverage. So that plays into healthcare data, of course, depending on where you are in the world. And so when we're thinking about implementation, that's also important, because of course the application is paramount, but at the same time, how, when you're going to cloud, how and where you implement. Well, if you're thinking about your national governance model, well, that may either allow or disallow things that you wanted to do. So that's one thing that comes to mind for sure.
Interesting. Steve, anything on the implementation side that you see?
I was thinking there have been so many surgical improvements recently that an overnight stay is quite common. But when it comes to healthcare software, there's nothing overnight. It takes certain times. It takes years when you think of medical devices, especially implementation in certain regions. So what we see is the very significant overhead of compliance matters prior to deployment, where technology is one thing, but what comes as a support, especially for diagnostic devices, is quite complicated. The other thing that we see is dependencies. Without divulging a lot of information, I mean, a lot of our cryptographic in-transit capabilities are quite outdated, because devices and clinical legacy systems cannot cope with more advanced ones. So that creates an integration problem with us, which obviously the migration to a cloud setting helps speed up, but we cannot ignore it, that not everything is cloud and not everything is at the latest state. So what we need to do is abstract it and being able to build applications that communicate or encrypt, aware of backward compatibility and everything that comes with it, which is an integration headache.
Interesting. So we know the weakest link in this whole cybersecurity protection is the human, the individual at their desk level. So in your travels, what are you seeing in terms of how healthcare enterprises are training their employees? I mean, all of us have gone through the training that, before you start your job, every month you get a phishing course that you have to take, and you try to get around it as fast as you can, because you try to predict the answers and you move on to see what your score is. How is training evolving now? Is it still pretty much the same? Are there any new techniques you're seeing out there with your clients?
We have the distinction to work with the Department of Defense and Veteran Affairs and Indian Health Services. So I can tell you, when you join and you are part of aligned with any of those contracts, it's going to be a lot of days and a lot of slides. And I don't find that particularly efficient. It is still the norm, but we have found that it actually, many cases, is counterproductive to essentially lead a message home. So what we're trying to do is gamify. We give badges away. We give people rights to brag, and we help them to get to the gold, the platinum, whatever it is. But in essence, we have found that to be more efficient because of motivation, but also we have made the training more frequent and shorter. So I can follow a 10-minute password protection video, a long hour annals of cyber attacking most likely will put me to sleep. And if it does it to me, imagine what others, that don't work in cybersecurity. So that's what we're trying to do. The other thing is that because of the significant learning curve of new colleagues that join our organization, we do a formal mentoring program where somebody may not be able to learn in a particular way, but learn by doing. So we encourage that as well. So there is a combination of things: gamify, shorter, more frequent, and also role specific. There's no point of somebody learning about encryption in transit when they actually only do as access an application. So that's what we're trying to do.
Are you seeing virtual reality being used at all in training?
No, we have not. Others do. We do not, and we do not because things change so often that the cost to keep up in such a medium is quite high. And also, we give more emphasis on a global audience, and we give an emphasis on keeping current rather than Now, what we do is scenarios. And that is also part of our ongoing phishing and such. So we do scenarios, but they're not VR-based.
One other thing is the ongoing program sort of with phishing and other social engineering tactics to send out emails to people and then record, who's falling for that, and then direct them to additional training. That's something that I've seen in a lot of places, and there's almost no substitute for that, because yes, you can have training, but the inbox is the ultimate battlefield. It's when people get something, what do they do? So making sure they understand what to look for, making sure they understand how to report things, what kind of phishing integration, phishing reporting integrations you have in whatever email client that people are using. Do they even know where to go and what to do? Kind of that becomes important as well.
It really does. And plus we have the AI arms race right now as it applies to cybersecurity. So looking at that aspect, it sort of leads into the next question of looking forward, thinking in the future strategy. What used to be important, it's less so, and what's becoming more and more important with the various sectors that you serve, whether it be AI, cloud, DevOps, cybersecurity, so on. What are the new priorities in terms of the product sets that you have?
Go ahead, Esteban.
Yeah. So look, it's a tough one, right? Because everything is important. I think automation, in order to reduce the burden on humans, that in healthcare is very important. Whether that will use some AI, right? It'll use some DevOps collaboration. Yeah, maybe all of the above. But how do we take some of the grunt work away from people, some of the repetitive work, and that
Mhm.
applies to everyone, right? Just the obvious examples of, revenue cycle people who deal with claims. Well, that is, there are a lot of people working on that. There's a lot more to be done, but even as we improve the number of clicks to do certain things in the EHR, or we introduce kind of chatbots, basically, our digital clinical assistant, that helps people not have to kind of do things that they don't want to do, or that take too long, or they're too tedious. And ultimately, it's not about replacing people. We just don't have enough people, right? And people are too busy. So it's about kind of freeing people up to do things that they're better at doing than machines, instead of kind of clicking 52 times, or instead of kind of looking for information, 20 different ways, or, maybe you have a pop-up list with too many things. Just how can things be more streamlined? And so certainly that kind of workflow efficiency, right? So people are less burdened by technology, kind of making technology be almost invisible. So AI, kind of the ultimate goal, I think, is for it to be invisible, right? Not kind of this obvious thing, but just helping out when it's necessary and when it's not necessary. Like, so you don't have to like decide to use AI, but rather kind of the
It's
approach.
oxygen. It's
Hey,
oxygen. Yeah.
yeah,
It's like
right.
oxygen. Yeah.
It's infusing it throughout everywhere so that it's useful.
Totally agree. And I mean, we're all in the business of burnout reduction. So
Exactly.
EMRs have gotten such a rap for being the cause, and also now for the solution. So I mean, we've got to look at how this stuff is keeping the workforce healthy and alive from a wellness point of view as well. And I know that's a major theme that Oracle Health is looking at themselves. Stephen, anything you'd like to add to that?
So the current strategy is affected by the migration to OCI. Obviously, the migration itself is a lift and shift migration, but what you result is a stack, that the security stack that resembles what was on-prem. We cannot afford that. We need to do better. So the strategy is to embellish that stack with better threat detection, dynamic components, things that are cloud specific, because the two things are different. Now, we said AI. So we've been having AI in our products for quite some time, but to sort of demystify the AI, we had natural language processing and some pattern matching for as part of the digital assistant, and for counterindicated drugs and such other features. The challenges for us, though, is how do we prepare for the inevitable evolution of these? So we're working on identifying methods where we can use real data to train the model without decrypting it. There are a lot of techniques that we're trying to become more familiar with as we will be asked to deploy that. The last thing that is quite important, because of the timeliness of releases, is automation around the DevOps process. So I said before, we have a bar. We know what we hold accountable, our developers and the code and all of that, as well as the management of controls for regulatory purposes.
Right.
Without automation, that process will only get more complicated and more lengthy in terms of being able to send code out to those who need it and have paid for it. So we're trying to employ as much automation as possible to shrink without compromising the quality of our SecDevOps process.
Very good. Very good. So I just approaching the end here. One follow-up question. We look at the workforce aspects of cybersecurity, and I'm curious what you're seeing is, if you had to assemble the dream team for a cybersecurity strategy, obviously there are normal suspects that would be on there that are security people. No revolution there. But what are some of the other titles that are in these high performance teams, and some of them that we might not have seen in previous eras of security?
So the new title, that we do have a department that we call client advocacy. And client advocate is someone who understands customer issues, priorities, and is your internal advocate within the security risk and compliance space. because the space is complex and it's not only the prioritization, but it's also a lot of negotiations and also understanding the nuances of contracts, especially in very big endeavors like, as I said before, the Department of Defense and such. It is other things that we see is about risk and program management in a context of understanding applications and how applications are being deployed. So all of those have a certain element to them. And the element is understanding the business, being able to talk to the customer. And I could not say, if it's one thing I have to pick is about to be an effective security partner, you have to understand the business. And it is easier for healthcare people because when something goes wrong, there is very little abstract. You know, a customer turns patients away, you have to do something about it. So what we do, we can only do well if we do understand that. And the other thing is that we have to also be cognizant of our audience. And many a time, we tend to be overly technocentric. We need to be able to translate, and that takes awareness, what's going on in security in the terms of potential penalties, exploitability factor, or breach of contract, things that your audience understands better, and be able to balance that technology knowledge, controlled deployment to the potential risk in terms that your audience understands. So that's what I'm
especially the finance suite, right?
Indeed.
But because I mean, we do a lot of focus groups, and we talk to the finance people, and they're looking to make cybersecurity a revenue center within the provider. So you do, but it's just a way of getting that in layman's terms of translating how indirectly it will be. It's in terms of trust of your brand and more customers coming in, but at the same time looking at the ROI aspects of it sometimes. Need help in terms of translation. So anything else in terms of you in the cloud side, Esteban, and the dream team? Are there new people on these deployment teams that we haven't seen in the past?
No, that's maybe not so new, but the whole data engineering side, right? Of how started talking about data scientists, and now we are even more specialized, talking about data architects and data engineers, and that obviously factors into security as well, especially when you're talking about large data sets, IDNs and things at population scale, and especially when you have collaboration between providers and research, right? Pharma or med devices where data is actually being used, sort of shared in some way. So the data engineers who maybe understand more about tokenization techniques that we didn't talk about so much before. Everybody talked about de-identification, but sometimes you need to be able to re-identify if you have the need, but it has to be done in the right, in the right framework.
We've come to the end of our time allocation here, but I'd like each of you to possibly give us a couple of closing remarks and takeaways that if you had to give one piece of advice as we close today from Oracle and Oracle Health, what that would be. Stephen, would you like to start?
First of all, thank you, Frank, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about what we do. We're very proud of our operation. Over the years in security, and there have been quite a few, there are two things that I think, and the two things that when I engage with customers, I try to convey. What do you pretend you do not know? And what do you have to lose? These are the two things that sort of give you a perspective of your awareness of your operation, but also the ability to quantify and to provide a perspective of you cannot secure everything in the same manner. So you have to have the ability to understand your data sets, your operations, your applications, and all of that. And that brings a much more grounded approach to complex security operations. So that's how we think. We do have the technology and the capability, but it is something that we do know very well that it has to be done in partnership with the customer. And that's why we deploy the programs we deploy, and we gave us the opportunity to talk to today. So thank you again.
Esteban, any closing gems?
I would say just to highlight our commitment to partnering with our customers, that we really think of ourselves as augmenting their staff and helping them focus on their core competencies by offloading some of the things to us. And again, as I mentioned before, the whole emphasis and focus on enterprise and infusing any kind of technology throughout the stack, whether it's the EHR application or middleware or analytics or the cloud infrastructure itself, regardless, it's all about kind of helping people get to their core mission. And we don't forget that, not everything is the same. So when we're working with healthcare customers, that is kind of front and center in kind of how we treat them and how we think about them.
Fantastic. All right, time for a few questions here. Thank you for the great presentations. Very compelling. We do have some questions from outside and from our studio audience here that I'd like to run through. One of them is very general but very poignant. The question is, why does this keep on happening over and over again? We have the best technologies, we have the best minds. I think the situation is that sometimes people would say, we only hear about the ones that happen, we don't hear about the ones that don't happen. So Esteban, what would be your cut on that? That with the best technologies, the best minds, why do these things happen over and over?
I think it's a combination of alarm fatigue and thinking that it's maybe harder and more expensive problem to solve than it really is. People have been talking about this for a very long time. They get approached by a lot of vendor partners, and it's almost like it's too much to deal with, but it shouldn't be, because it is, as you said, eminently fixable. And the alarm fatigue aspect of that, I would say it may be time for a reset, because absolutely everybody should have a solution for this. We, as you said, have the technology. It's not an unsurmountable problem, and yet it's a lack of focus. I think there's people think that they're putting attention to it, and some people are, but overall, as we see, because as you said, it keeps happening over and over and over, there's not enough focus, and there's focus on other projects that are very large, and it has to be a board level type of mandate, right? It's like, it doesn't matter what happened in the past, doesn't matter how annoying it is, nothing else matters. Like, this should be priority one, and the only place it can come from is the board, the highest level.
Interesting. I go ahead, Steve, if you had another comment, just a follow-up question too.
The threat landscape is evolving, and it's becoming much more complex. So even with the deployment of the best possible technology, we're still dealing with a very, very complex setup. In a clinical setting, we're also dealing with a lot of legacy. We said the same thing before. Hospitals do have outdated technology, and that outdated technology not only forces us to not update as quickly as we could our other applications, but it also poses in itself quite a threat. So therefore, despite the best technologies and the best intentions and the best budgets, which invariably we don't have, the threat continues to be there, and we still see similar scenes of the past being repeated.
We have an interesting question here that it sort of relates to what you would call your shield strategy. One of our questioners asked, how do we know how widespread the implications of a breach might be? I mean, some of the ones we've seen recently had such far-reaching implications on other businesses totally outside of healthcare. People couldn't write checks, electronic checks, because of the way that the virus was integrated. Is there a way, the questioner wants to know, is there a way that these audits can tell how the tentacles of their system goes into other places that are just not typically known to them?
I typically suggest to any customer, and this is something we can help with, to explore specific scenarios. Not only that scenario will help them validate their capability to communicate and respond, but also to identify exactly what you said, what is truly the impact. And some of that impact could be complicated or sort of not evident downstream. The autonomous shield will just discuss your ability to communicate and whether you actually have a plan. It is an event that we aim to do in a very short period of time, to the tune of 2 days. But that aside, if there is a customer that would like to discuss in particular, their capability to respond to an incident, to play scenarios, to identify their communication method and their responsiveness internally and externally, that we're very happy to engage with them and help them with that process. We do quite a few of those every month.
Very good. Esteban, we have a question here about getting whiplash about determining where the center of gravity should be in cloud versus on-prem versus hybrid. I'm just curious to your point of view. We talked to some people that said I'm actually shifting a little bit back towards on-prem, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. And I'm sure in a world of collaboration, in terms of the number of platforms, you deal with every possible scenario that you could see. What's your advice?
It's a great question, and everything has a role. There's no right answer, and everything should be considered. In our experience and our position is that, of course, it is a multi-cloud world, so you should look at everything that's available out there, as well as the ability to have cloud components on-prem, because I don't think the dichotomy is really about whether you're on-prem or in the cloud, but whether you're managing the hardware. I think what the organizations that I work with in general, they don't want to be in the business of managing data centers, managing racks of servers and storage and networking equipment. So it's possible to have the best of both worlds with an approach. We have our cloud customer, there are others that are similar, where you have an extension of the cloud that can be private to you in your data center. And so therefore you have something that satisfies the locality of that data and that equipment in your data center, but it's really part of the cloud. So it has all the services and all the flexibility of moving stuff around that you would otherwise get. So I think that gives you really the best of both worlds.
If you look at the typical clinical system between communications, payments, and all of that, I think it is quite evident it is multi-cloud. And it's also looking at legacy and such, it's quite evident it's hybrid of some sort. But like what Esteban said, do you want to be in the business of managing hardware, and how good are you at it? And what about the ability to manage vendors? Because most likely you're going to be looking into one or two vendors given the nature of how these things work. So again, having said that, I believe hybrid is most likely the kind of scenario that we see. But the whole argument of is on-prem more secure is not just about security. A lot of it has to do with maintenance, and they're related. But then again, from an effort and capacity perspective, they're not.
I'm sure that response helps. One of our attendees said that we're starting to see CISOs burn out just as much as we're seeing clinical burnout. I know this is a big deal for anybody that's working on usability, especially as it relates to cybersecurity products. Steve, how would you characterize Oracle Health's relationship with helping to solve that CISO burnout problem?
So I think it has to do with building the right team and relying on the right technology. I think the burnout is inevitable when you always operate on a very high stress and high potential issues, and you rely on you doing it yourself. Your burnout is inevitable. So work-life balance has to be managed on any job, not just a CISO job. And then start thinking of everything you do on a risk basis. You cannot fix everything. It's mathematically impossible. You will fix those things that have the highest impact or the highest likelihood to be exploited. And you have to start thinking this way. And it may sound like casino to a lot of people, but it is statistical to some degree. And that's how, at least I think. And to also make sure you can delegate. And meaningful delegation. Rely on people who can actually have the capacity, the ability, and the authority to do the work, because then the burden becomes more manageable. But having said that, there are people that I've met over the years, CISOs, that we want to think of ourselves as a special breed. We like to operate on very high RPM, and that is okay. But it is not something anyone can do alone.
That's great. I don't see any further questions here, so I'd like to thank Esteban and Steve for a fantastic webinar. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today and hanging in there during this presentation and the Q&A. This webinar will be available for on demand shortly. You'll be getting an email about that. So in the meantime, thank you for joining us. Thanks for your support of Chime and Digital Health Insights and Oracle Health and Oracle Storage. Thank you, guys.
And
Thank you,
you,
Frank.
Frank.